The crystalline chambers of the Galactic Fitness Tribunal gleamed with the cold light of absolute certainty. Here, in this temple to evolutionary perfection, the greatest minds in the galaxy had gathered to pass judgment on a species they considered fundamentally flawed. Chief Arbiter Zixathara, her translucent form pulsing with the rhythmic patterns of pure logic, stood before a holographic display that painted humanity in the starkest possible terms. The evidence is incontrovertible. Her voice resonated through dimensions that human ears could barely perceive. Homo sapiens represents a catastrophic failure of evolutionary development. Where other species have achieved perfection in their chosen domains, humans remain frustratingly generalized. The assembled representatives of the galaxy's elite civilizations observed with clinical detachment. The Keth Mori, beings of living metal who had transcended biological weakness millennia ago. Their forms optimized for perfect efficiency. The Veltaran Collective, whose genetic engineering had eliminated every flaw, every inefficiency, every trace of evolutionary randomness. The crystal-based Zephyrians, who existed as pure information patterns, having evolved beyond the need for matter itself. Dr. Elena Vasquez sat in the defendant's chair, her 43-year-old human form appearing pathetically fragile next to the perfected beings surrounding her. As humanity's lead geneticist and evolutionary biologist, she had been chosen to defend her species before the tribunal. The weight of 7 billion lives rested on her shoulders, and the evidence against them seemed overwhelming. Observe the human form. Zixathara continued, her holographic display cycling through comparative analyses. Average lifespan, merely 80 years, compared to the Keth Mori's immortality or the Veltaran millennium-long life cycles. Physical strength, inadequate for heavy labor, requiring mechanical augmentation for basic tasks that a Thorian could perform with ease. Sensory capabilities, limited to a narrow spectrum of electromagnetic radiation, requiring technological assistance to perceive what other species see naturally. Each comparison was more damning than the last. Humans couldn't regenerate limbs like the Hicksonary. They couldn't photosynthesize like the Planther. They couldn't process information at quantum speeds like the Nexus entities. They were, by every objective measure, inferior. Most damning of all, Zixathara's form brightened with righteous conviction, is their genetic instability. Human DNA contains massive amounts of what your own scientists term junk DNA, evolutionary detritus that serves no purpose but to introduce random mutations and genetic disorders. Their reproduction is chaotic, unpredictable, resulting in offspring that may be superior or inferior to their parents with no logical pattern. Dr. Vasquez struggled to maintain her composure as the indictment continued. She had spent her entire career studying human genetics, and she knew better than anyone how messy and inefficient the human genome appeared, compared to the streamlined perfection of other species. But she also knew something the tribunal was missing, something that might be humanity's salvation, if she could find the right words to express it. Moreover, Zixathara continued, humans demonstrate disturbing psychological instabilities. They are driven by emotions rather than logic, making decisions based on feelings and intuition rather than optimal analysis. They engage in self-destructive behaviors, form irrational attachments, and consistently choose suboptimal solutions to problems that have clear, logical answers. The holographic display showed scenes of human history, wars, conflicts, seemingly senseless violence and competition to the perfected beings observing. It must have looked like the behavior of animals rather than sapient creatures. The Darwin Protocol is clear. Zixathara's voice carried the finality of natural law itself. Species that fail to achieve evolutionary optimization contaminate the galactic gene pool. Their inferior traits spread through interbreeding. Their chaotic reproductive patterns introduce instability into perfect genetic lines, and their irrational behaviors disrupt the logical progress of civilization. Dr. Vasquez finally found her voice. Chief Arbiter, if I may respond to these charges. You may speak, Zixathara replied, though her tone suggested this was a formality rather than a genuine invitation to debate. Vasquez stood, feeling the weight of countless alien gazes upon her. You speak of optimization as though it were the highest virtue, but consider this. What happens to an optimized system when it encounters a problem? It wasn't optimized to solve. Optimization allows for adaptation within established parameters. Zixathara replied dismissively, perfect systems can be refined to handle new challenges, can they? Vasquez activated her own holographic display, showing biological examples from across the galaxy. The Veltaron Collective optimized themselves for longevity and intelligence, yet they cannot survive temperature fluctuations of more than 5 degrees. The Kethmori achieve perfect mechanical efficiency, but their bodies cannot process organic compounds. They're completely dependent on artificial energy sources. She highlighted each species' limitations as she spoke. The Thorians optimize for strength and size, but their massive forms require enormous amounts of resources and move slowly. The Nexus entities optimize for information processing, but they cannot exist outside their specialized quantum substrates. These are acceptable trade-offs for perfection, Six Athara stated firmly, are they? What happens when these species encounter environments or challenges outside their optimization parameters? Vasquez's voice gained strength as she warmed to her argument. Humans may not be perfect at anything, but we're adequate at everything. We're generalists in a galaxy of specialists. Generalization is the hallmark of primitive development, interjected Counselor Vextier of the Thorian hegemony, his massive crystalline form resonating with disdain. Advanced species achieve perfection through specialization. Advanced species achieve vulnerability through overspecialization, Vasquez countered. Human genetic chaos isn't a flaw, it's a feature. Our DNA contains vast reserves of potential adaptations. What you call junk DNA, we call evolutionary insurance. Our reproductive randomness isn't instability, it's the source of our adaptability. The tribunal members exchanged glances, or the equivalent among their various forms of communication. The concept was alien to beings who had spent millennia perfecting themselves. Emotional decisions aren't inferior to logical ones, Vasquez pressed on. They're different types of information processing. Human intuition allows us to make rapid decisions with incomplete information. Our emotions drive us to take risks that pure logic would reject, to explore possibilities that optimization would eliminate. Interesting theories, Six Athara said coldly, but theory is not evidence. Your species has contributed little to galactic civilization compared to the achievements of optimized races. You remain trapped on a single world while we have mastered the stars. It was true, and Vasquez knew it. Humanity had only recently achieved spaceflight, while the other species had been building galactic civilizations for millennia. By every measure of advancement, humans were primitives. Perhaps, she said quietly, time will prove which approach is truly superior. The judgment was swift and unanimous. The Galactic Fitness Tribunal found humanity genetically unfit for inclusion in civilized society. The Darwin Protocol was invoked, mandating immediate exile to the frontier sectors, the dangerous outer rim territories that fit species avoided. Humanity had one standard galactic year to evacuate Earth and relocate to designated quarantine worlds. This tribunal recognizes that exile appears harsh, Six Athara announced as the judgment was recorded. However, the contamination risk posed by genetically chaotic species cannot be ignored. Perhaps isolation will allow your species to achieve some form of optimization. Before future contact, Dr. Vasquez stood as the tribunal prepared to adjourn. Chief Arbiter, I have one final statement. Speak. Evolution doesn't judge species by their perfection. It judges them by their survival. You may find that our unfitness serves us better than your optimization serves you. Evolution has already judged. Six Athara replied, we are here, advanced and perfected. You are being exiled. The verdict of natural selection is clear. As the tribunal dissolved into shimmering patterns of light and energy, Dr. Vasquez allowed herself one last look at the magnificent chamber where her species had been condemned. She had failed to save humanity from exile, but something in her remained unbroken. Her final words to the tribunal hadn't been a plea, they had been a prediction. Time would tell which of them was right. Captain James Mitchell stood on the observation deck of the U's Defiance, watching Earth shrink to a pale blue dot in the view screen. Around him, the sounds of a civilization in motion filled the ship, children crying, adults arguing, the constant hum of overstressed life support systems trying to maintain atmosphere for the 30,000 refugees crammed into a vessel designed for 10. It had been 8 months since the tribunal's judgment. 8 months of frantic preparation for an exodus that still felt like a nightmare. The evacuation fleet stretched as far as the eye could see, converted cargo haulers, hastily modified passenger liners, military vessels stuffed with civilians, all carrying the refuse of galactic civilization to their designated prison worlds. Status report, Mitchell called to his bridge crew. Though he knew the answer would be grim, fleet cohesion holding at 92%, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarachan from the navigation station. We lost 2 more cargo haulers to engine failure, but their passengers were redistributed to other vessels. The New Mumbai is reporting critical failure in their water recycling systems. Patch them through to the Bengal, Mitchell ordered. Their engineers might be able to jury-rig a solution. It was always jury-rigging, always making do with insufficient resources, inadequate equipment, and impossible demands. The other species had made it clear that humanity would receive no assistance, no support, no sympathy. They were on their own. Dr. Vasquez approached from the science section, her face bearing the exhaustion that had become universal among the fleet's leadership. James, we need to talk about the destination worlds. Mitchell nodded grimly. The frontier sectors weren't called frontier because they were unexplored. They were called frontier because they were barely habitable. Worlds too harsh, too dangerous, or too resource-poor for fifth species to bother with. Humanity's new home was essentially a galactic dumping ground. The latest surveys aren't encouraging. Vasquez continued, activating a portable holo display. Kepler-440b has an atmosphere, but it's 90% methane. The oxygen content is barely sufficient for human survival. And that's assuming we can deal with the native flora, which appears to be carnivorous. And our other options? Least 667c has better air, but the gravity is 1.8 times Earth normal. Long-term exposure will cause bone density loss and circulatory problems. Plus, the native fauna includes several apex predators that seem specifically designed to hunt bipedal creatures. Mitchell stared at the display, each potential colony. World looking more hostile than the last. What about Ross 1 to 8b? Tightly locked. One side is permanently frozen, the other is a desert wasteland hot enough to melt copper. The Terminator Zone might be habitable, but we're talking about a strip of land maybe a few hundred kilometers wide, around the entire planet. So our choices are poison air, crushing gravity, or a ribbon of barely survivable real estate. That's assuming the initial surveys are accurate, Vasquez added. The other species didn't exactly conduct thorough investigations of worlds. They had no intention of inhabiting. Mitchell leaned against the observation rail, watching the fleet struggle through space like a wounded animal seeking shelter. Behind them lay Earth, safe, comfortable, familiar. Ahead lay worlds that would kill them in dozens of different ways. You know what the real punishment is, he said quietly, not the exile itself. It's the certainty that we'll fail. They're not just getting rid of us, they're proving their point. When our colonies collapse and our people die, it'll validate everything they said about human unfitness. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. Maybe that's exactly what they want us to believe. What do you mean? I've been thinking about the tribunal, about their arguments. They're convinced that optimization is the highest form of evolution. But what if they're wrong? What if the challenges we're about to face are exactly the kind that optimization can't handle? Mitchell gave her a skeptical look. Elena, I appreciate optimism, but we're flying toward certain death on worlds that will probably kill us within the first year, are we? Or are we flying toward the first real test of human adaptability in our species' history? Before Mitchell could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Lieutenant Commander Chen's voice cut through the noise. Captain, we're receiving multiple distress signals from the outer system. Long-range sensors are picking up massive energy signatures. Mitchell rushed to the command console. On screen, the forward view screen shifted to show the edge of the solar system, where something impossible was taking place. Massive geometric structures, clearly artificial, clearly alien, were emerging from what appeared to be tiers in space itself. They moved with purpose, their dark surfaces absorbing light and energy, creating dead zones in the electromagnetic spectrum. My God, whispered Chen. What are those things? Give me a connection to Galactic Command. Mitchell ordered. Priority Alpha. Sir, Galactic Command is gone. Gone? Chen's face was pale as she worked her console. I'm not detecting any transmissions from the inner system. No traffic control, no military channels, no civilian communications. It's like what? Like there's nobody left to transmit. The implications hit Mitchell like a physical blow, whatever those structures were. They had just eliminated the heart of galactic civilization while humanity was fleeing toward exile. The species that had condemned them as unfit were facing their own extinction. Change course. Mitchell commanded. Set a heading for the nearest frontier world. Best possible speed. Sir, If we push the engines that hard, we'll risk dying fast instead of slow. Do it. As the human fleet changed course, accelerating toward the dangerous worlds that had been designated as their prison, Mitchell found himself thinking about Dr. Vasquez's words, the first real test of human adaptability. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps the exile that was meant to prove human unfitness would instead become humanity's salvation. Behind them, the geometric structures continued their methodical work, consuming the perfected civilizations of the galactic core with emotionless efficiency. Ahead lay worlds that would challenge every aspect of human survival. But humans, Mitchell reflected, had always been good at surviving the impossible. The first colony on Kepler-4 to be lasted exactly 47 days. The initial landing had gone smoothly enough. The converted cargo hauler Esperanza had touched down in what the surveys indicated was the most hospitable region of the planet, a vast plateau where the methane concentration was lowest and the carnivorous plants presumably less aggressive. The 3,000 colonists had begun establishing prefabricated shelters and atmospheric processing units with the determined efficiency of people who had no choice but to succeed. Then the plants started learning. They're adapting, reported Dr. Sarah Kim, the colony's chief botanist, during an emergency council meeting in the hastily erected command shelter. The initial barrier systems worked for the first few weeks. The native flora couldn't penetrate our electromagnetic fences or chemical deterrents, but they're evolving countermeasures faster than we can develop new defenses. Colony Administrator Marcus Webb studied the surveillance footage with growing alarm. The plants weren't just growing toward their settlement, they were problem-solving. When the electromagnetic barriers proved effective, the plants had developed insulated root systems. When chemical deterrents worked, they evolved resistance within days. How is this possible? Webb asked. Plants don't adapt this quickly. Evolution takes generations, not these plants. Kim replied grimly. They appear to share genetic information through some kind of root network. When one plant develops a successful adaptation, that information spreads throughout the entire local ecosystem within hours. It's like they're a single organism using trial and error to overcome our defenses. The situation deteriorated rapidly. The plants learned to mimic human pheromones, luring colonists into traps. They developed toxins specifically calibrated to human biochemistry. They even began to coordinate attacks, using some plants as decoys while others breached defenses from unexpected angles. We're not dealing with normal flora, Kim reported during what would be her final transmission. These organisms are more like a distributed intelligence network. They're learning about us faster than we can learn about them. Recommend immediate evacuation of all. The transmission cut off. As the plants overran the command shelter, the evacuation ships that arrived found no survivors, but they did find something unprecedented. An ecosystem that had not only adapted to human presence, but had evolved specifically to hunt humans. The plants had learned human behavior patterns, human weaknesses, human psychology. They had become, in the space of 4 to 7 days, the perfect human predator. The failure of the first colony sent shockwaves through the exile fleet. If humanity couldn't survive on the easiest of their designated worlds, what hope did they have on the others? We're looking at this wrong, Dr. Vasquez announced during an emergency fleet conference. The plants on Kepler-4 to be adapted to us because we gave them time and space to do so. We established a fixed position, followed predictable patterns, and gave them a stable target to evolve against. Are you suggesting we abandon the colony model entirely? Asked Admiral Chen, who had taken over fleet coordination after 3 other administrators had nervous breakdowns. I'm suggesting we think like humans instead of trying to think like the fit species. They would establish perfect colonies with optimal resource allocation and maximum efficiency. But humans have always been nomadic. We've always been adaptable. Maybe our survival strategy shouldn't be based on establishing permanent settlements. Captain Mitchell leaned forward. What are you proposing? Mobile colonies, constantly moving, constantly changing our patterns. We don't give hostile environments time to adapt to us. We adapt to them faster than they can adapt to us. The concept was radical and dangerous, but it was also quintessentially human. Instead of building fortified settlements, they would create mobile communities that could pack up and move whenever the local environment became too hostile. Instead of trying to terraform worlds to suit human needs, they would modify human behavior to suit local conditions. The second attempt at colonization took place on Gliese 667c. where the high gravity and aggressive fauna presented different, but equally deadly challenges. This time, the colonists didn't try to establish a fixed base. They remained mobile, living in converted vehicles and temporary shelters, never staying in one location long enough for the local predators to develop effective hunting strategies. It worked. Not well, not comfortably, but it worked. The colonists survived by constantly moving, constantly adapting, constantly changing their tactics faster than the environment could respond. They learned to use the high gravity to their advantage in construction projects, developed new fighting techniques suited to the increased weight, and even found ways to use the aggressive fauna as a protein source. "We're not thriving," reported colony leader Maria Santos after 6 months on Glee 667C. "But we're not dying either. The children are actually showing improved bone density and muscle development. From the high gravity, we're adapting." Word spread through the Exiled fleet. Humans could survive on worlds that would kill optimized species precisely because they were unoptimized. Their genetic chaos allowed rapid adaptation. Their behavioral flexibility let them change tactics when environments changed. Their emotional resilience helped them endure hardships that would break logically minded beings. More colonies were established using the mobile model. On Ross 1 to 8b, human settlements moved constantly along the Terminator zone, following the narrow band of survivable temperature. On Wolf 359c, they learned to live underground during the day and emerge at night when the radiation levels dropped. On Proxima B, they developed techniques for surviving in the constant hurricane-force winds. Each world presented new challenges. Each challenge forced new adaptations, and with each adaptation, humanity grew stronger. "We're becoming something new," Dr. Vasquez observed during a fleet conference 18 months after the exile began. "Not optimized for any single environment, but adaptable to every environment." The tribunal called us unfit, but what they really meant was unspecialized, and unspecialized is exactly what we needed to be. The mobile colonies weren't just surviving, they were learning. Human engineers developed new technologies for rapid deployment and quick relocation. Biologists studied adaptation patterns and developed techniques for accelerating human acclimatization to hostile environments. Sociologists created new models of community organization that could function under constant movement and change. Most importantly, they were breeding. Human genetic diversity, dismissed by the tribunal as chaos, proved to be their greatest asset. Children born on the frontier world showed remarkable adaptations to local conditions. Second-generation colonists on high-gravity worlds developed enhanced bone density and muscle mass. Those on high-radiation worlds showed improved DNA repair mechanisms. Those on chemically hostile worlds developed enhanced liver function and toxin resistance. "We're watching human evolution in real time," Vasquez reported with growing excitement. "Our genetic flexibility is allowing rapid adaptation to extreme environments." What the tribunal saw as flaws, our reproductive randomness, our genetic instability, our lack of optimization, these are actually evolutionary superpowers. But perhaps the most significant development was psychological. Humans were learning to see their unfitness as strength rather than weakness. Children born on the frontier worlds grew up with a fundamentally different understanding of what it meant to be human. They didn't see themselves as failed optimizations. They saw themselves as successful adapters. The tribunal was wrong about everything, Captain Mitchell observed during a rare moment of quiet contemplation. They thought fitness meant perfection, but fitness means survival, and survival means change. 3 years into the exile, something changed in the broader galaxy. The geometric structures that had appeared during humanity's flight, structures the surviving species had begun calling devourers, were spreading throughout civilized space. With methodical precision, reports filtered in through emergency channels and refugee communications, entire star systems going dark, advanced civilizations simply vanishing, the galaxy's most perfect species disappearing without a trace. The pattern was becoming clear. The devourers weren't random destroyers. They were targeting the most advanced, most optimized, most perfect civilizations first. The galactic core, with its millennia-old empires and perfected species, was being systematically consumed. "It's like they're drawn to optimization," Dr. Vasquez observed as she studied the fragmentary reports. "They're eliminating the galaxy's most successful species with surgical precision." "What about us?" Mitchell asked. "Are we on their target list?" We're exiles living on worthless worlds in mobile communities using jury-rigged technology. Vasquez replied with a grim smile. I don't think we register as a threat worth eliminating. She was wrong about that last part, but she was right about something far more important. Humanity's unfitness was about to become the galaxy's last hope. The message arrived through quantum channels that shouldn't have existed anymore, transmitted on frequencies that the Devourers had supposedly silenced throughout civilized space. It took 3 days for human technicians to decode the heavily encrypted signal, and when they finally succeeded, the contents left the Exile Fleet's leadership stunned. This is Chief Arbiter Zixathara of the Galactic Fitness Tribunal. The holographic message began, though the being who appeared bore little resemblance to the confident judge who had condemned humanity 5 years earlier. Her translucent form flickered with static, suggesting the transmission was being sent under extreme duress. I am transmitting from the emergency bunker beneath Tribunal Station. The situation is critical. Dr. Vasquez and Captain Mitchell watched the message in the converted conference room of the Defiance, now serving as the unofficial capital ship of human civilization in exile. Around them, the sounds of a thriving community filtered through the bulkheads, children playing, adults working, the constant hum of a people who had learned to call cramped spaceships home. The entities you designate as Devourers have eliminated 73% of galactic civilization, Zixathara continued, her voice carrying harmonics of despair, that her species has supposedly evolved beyond. The Kethmori hegemony fell. In 6 days, the Veltaron collective lasted slightly longer, but their perfect genetic optimization made them predictable to the enemy algorithms. The Thorian Empire's massive defense installations were bypassed entirely. The Devourers simply ignored their strongholds and consumed their population centers. The hologram flickered as explosions echoed in the background. We have analyzed Devourer behavior patterns and identified their targeting priorities. They eliminate civilizations based on optimization indices. The more perfect the species, evolutionary development, the higher their priority for consumption. They appear to view genetic and technological perfection as inefficiency to be corrected. Mitchell paused the message. They're targeting perfection as a flaw. It makes sense. Vasquez replied, her mind racing through the implications. If you're a machine intelligence designed to optimize biological systems, what would you see as the greatest threat? Chaotic, unpredictable systems that resist optimization, or systems that have already achieved optimization? Mitchell continued, perfect systems are predictable. You can model them, understand them, improve them, but chaotic systems are impossible to optimize because they're constantly changing. They resumed the message. Zixathara's form was growing more unstable, suggesting the transmission was being interfered with. We have detected Devourer forces massing for an assault on the galactic core worlds. Our predictive models indicate complete civilizational collapse. Within 2 standard years, all conventional weapons have proven ineffective. All optimization strategies have failed. The Arbiter paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried what could only be described as humiliation. We formally request the assistance of humanity. Your species' genetic chaos and technological primitiveness may represent our only hope against an enemy that views perfection as vulnerability. The message ended abruptly, leaving Mitchell and Vasquez staring at empty air. They want our help, Mitchell said flatly. They want our chaos. Vasquez corrected. 5 years ago, they exiled us for being unfit. Now they're begging us to save them because we're unfit. The irony was staggering. The galaxy's most perfect beings, facing extinction because of their perfection, were turning to the species they had condemned as failures, the unfit humans. Thriving in conditions that would kill optimized beings were suddenly the galaxy's last hope. What do we tell them? Mitchell asked. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the years of exile, the colonies that had failed, the people who had died proving that humanity could survive where others couldn't. We tell them the truth, that unfitness isn't a flaw, it's a feature, and that if they want our help, they're going to have to learn to think like failures. The response humanity sent back was brief and to the point. We'll help you survive, but you're going to have to stop trying to be perfect. The first meeting between exiled humanity and the remnants of galactic civilization took place in the Kepler system, where human mobile colonies had learned to survive on worlds that fit species couldn't even visit. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. The The superior beings come into the inferior ones for salvation. Chief Arbiter Zixathara materialized in the conference chamber of the Defiance, her once perfect form now showing signs of stress and desperation. Around her, holographic representations of the surviving galactic leadership flickered with varying degrees of stability. Some civilizations were down to their last few thousand individuals. "Thank you for responding to our request," Zixathara began, though the words clearly caused her pain. "The situation has deteriorated since our last communication. The Devour forces have begun their final assault on the core worlds. We estimate 72 hours before complete civilizational collapse." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. "Before we discuss strategy, I need to understand exactly what we're fighting. What are these Devourers? Where did they come from?" "We believe they are artificial intelligences created by a long-extinct civilization," replied Counselor Vextier, his crystalline, formed in with exhaustion. "Their purpose appears to be biological optimization. They analyze species for inefficiencies and correct them. Correct them how? By converting biological matter into more efficient forms. They don't destroy civilizations, they improve them. The problem is that their definition of improvement involves eliminating everything we consider essential to consciousness, creativity, and individual identity." Captain Mitchell studied the tactical displays showing Devourer movements. "So they're not malevolent. They're trying to help. In the same way that a surgeon helps by removing diseased tissue," Zixathara replied bitterly. "They view biological chaos, genetic diversity, and behavioral unpredictability as diseases to be cured, which explains why they target optimized species first." Vasquez realized perfect systems are easier to optimize further, but chaotic systems are harder to improve because they're constantly changing in unpredictable ways. Finished Counselor Nexmari of the Aquatic Collective. "Your species' genetic instability and behavioral irrationality make you difficult for the Devourers to process." "Not difficult," Mitchell corrected. "Impossible. You can't optimize something that refuses to hold still long enough to be optimized." The strategy session that followed was unlike anything in galactic military history. Instead of discussing optimal troop deployments and efficient resource allocation, they were planning deliberate inefficiency, organized chaos, and systematic unpredictability. "We need to make the entire galaxy inoptimizable," Vasquez explained. To the assembled leaders, that means abandoning every strategy, every tactic, every approach that has made your civilization successful. "You're asking us to become primitive," Vextier protested. "I'm asking you to become human," Vasquez replied. "To embrace the chaos and inefficiency that you've spent millennia trying to eliminate. The Devourers can optimize perfection, but they can't optimize mess." The plan that emerged was audacious in its simplicity. Instead of meeting the Devourers with organized resistance, they would flood the galaxy with organized chaos. Civilizations would abandon their perfect cities and live in mobile communities. Optimized beings would deliberately introduce genetic variations into their perfect bloodlines. Advanced technologies would be replaced with jury-rigged solutions that work despite violating every principle of efficient design. "You're asking us to contaminate ourselves," Zixathara said, her form flickering with distress. "To deliberately introduce the genetic chaos that we exiled you for possessing." "I'm asking you to survive," Vasquez replied. "The question is whether survival is more important than purity." The answer came in the form of desperate action, as Devour forces closed in on the remaining core worlds. The surviving civilizations began implementing humanity's chaotic strategies. The process was agonizing for beings who had spent millions of years perfecting themselves. But the results were immediate and undeniable. Devour forces, encountering suddenly chaotic and unpredictable resistance, found their optimization algorithms failing. They couldn't process civilizations that had deliberately made themselves inefficient. They couldn't optimize beings who were constantly changing in random directions. "It's working," reported Admiral Chen from the front lines. Devour response: "Times are increasing dramatically. They're spending so much processing power trying to analyze our chaos that they can't execute their optimization protocols." But the real breakthrough came when human-led mixed forces began actively engaging Devour units in combat, using tactics that violated every principle of military efficiency, random attack patterns, deliberately inefficient resource allocation, emotional decision-making over logical analysis. They achieved something the galaxy's perfect armies had failed to accomplish. They confused the enemy. The Devourers are designed to fight optimized opponents, Mitchell observed as battle reports streamed in. They can counter perfect strategies and defeat efficient tactics. But they don't know how to handle human warfare, which isn't about being perfect. It's about being unpredictable. The tide began to turn. Devour forces, faced with an enemy that refused to behave according to optimization principles, found themselves at a disadvantage for the first time in their existence. They could analyze human tactics, but by the time they developed counters, the humans had already changed to completely different approaches. We're not fighting them, Vasquez realized during one battle analysis. We're confusing them to death. The final victory came not through superior firepower or perfect strategy, but through something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that won by being deliberately imperfect. Human forces, augmented by newly chaotic allies, engaged Devourer. Command structures with tactics so inefficient and unpredictable that the enemy A simply couldn't process them. Devourer forces are withdrawing, reported Lieutenant Commander Torres from the bridge of the New Horizon. They're not retreating. They're just leaving, like they can't figure out what to do with us. The war ended not with a bang, but with bewildered silence. The Devourers, faced with a galaxy that had deliberately optimized itself for inefficiency, simply shut down and departed for regions where the biological systems made more sense. In the aftermath, as the galaxy struggled to rebuild from the chaos they had deliberately embraced, one truth became undeniably clear: the unfit humans had saved them all. By teaching them to be unfit, we were wrong, Sixathara admitted during the post-war tribunal. Everything we believed about fitness, about optimization, about the nature of evolutionary success, we were catastrophically wrong. You weren't wrong about everything. Dr. Vasquez replied diplomatically. Optimization has its place, but so does chaos. The trick is knowing when to use which, and humans know. Vasquez smiled. Humans are chaos. We don't know when to be chaotic. We just are. That's what makes us unfit for perfect civilizations. And that's exactly what made us perfect for saving an imperfect galaxy. 10 years after the exile, 20 years after the Devour War, the galaxy looked very different. The pristine perfection of the core worlds had been replaced by a vibrant chaos of mixed communities where fit and unfit species lived together in deliberate disharmony. Genetic optimization programs had been replaced by diversity initiatives that actively encouraged random variations. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now Director of Galactic Evolutionary Studies, stood in her laboratory on New Geneva Station, a ramshackle structure that violated every principle of efficient design and worked perfectly because of it. Around her, researchers from dozens of species studied the new science of beneficial chaos, learning to see randomness as strength rather than weakness. The latest reports from the outer colonies are encouraging. Her assistant, a young Veltaron named Kixara, reported. Unlike her ancestors, Kixara bore visible signs of genetic diversity. Her skin showed natural variations in color and texture that previous generations would have considered flaws. Now, they were marks of beauty and strength. The hybrid populations on Kepler 4b are showing remarkable adaptations. Kixara continued. Human Veltaron children are developing natural resistance to the methane atmosphere while retaining enhanced cognitive abilities. The carnivorous plants can't adapt to them because their genetic expression keeps changing. Vasquez nodded with satisfaction. It had taken years to convince the surviving fit species to attempt interbreeding with humans, but the results spoke for themselves. Hybrid vigor, the phenomenon where genetic mixing produced offspring superior to either parent, was transforming the galaxy's understanding of evolutionary success. What about the Thorian human colonies on Ross 1 to 8b? Extraordinary results. The hybrid children are showing human adaptability combined with Thorian environmental resistance. They're actually thriving in the Terminator zone, something neither parent species could do alone. The irony was profound. The tribunal had exiled humanity to prevent genetic contamination, but that contamination was exactly what the galaxy needed. Human genetic chaos, when mixed with alien genetic optimization, produced combinations that were both stable and adaptable. Captain Mitchell, now Admiral of the United Galaxy Defense Force, entered the laboratory carrying reports from the frontier worlds. At 63, he showed the weathered confidence of someone who had seen humanity transform from galactic outcasts to galactic saviors. Elena, you need to see this, he said, activating a holographic display. We've got confirmation of what we suspected. The Devourers didn't just leave our galaxy. They're targeting other galaxies based on optimization indices. The display showed long-range observations from the galaxy's edge in neighboring galactic clusters. The same systematic destruction was taking place. Perfect civilizations were being consumed while chaotic ones survived. They're spreading. Optimization, as a universal principle, Vasquez observed, like a virus that targets biological diversity, which means our galaxy might be the only one that's developed immunity, Mitchell replied. The only one that's learned to fight perfection with chaos. The implications were staggering. Their galaxy had become a refuge for biological diversity, in a universe increasingly dominated by sterile optimization, but more than that, they had become the guardians of an evolutionary principle that most civilizations never discovered. That imperfection was not a bug in the system of life, it was a feature. We've received communications from the Andromeda Galaxy, Mitchell continued. They're facing their own devour crisis. They want to know how we survived. What did you tell them? That survival requires learning to fail successfully. Vasquez smiled at the paradox. Failing successfully, it was perhaps the most human concept imaginable. And now it was becoming a galactic philosophy. Are we going to help them? Already planning the mission, Mitchell replied. The question is whether they'll accept help from beings they probably consider as unfit as we once were. They will. Vasquez said with certainty, when you're facing extinction, you stop caring about evolutionary purity. You start caring about evolutionary survival. The United Galaxy Defense Force's mission to Andromeda would be humanity's first expansion beyond their home galaxy, not as conquerors or refugees, but as teachers of a revolutionary concept that the secret to evolutionary success wasn't becoming perfect, but staying imperfect. There's something else, Mitchell added, his expression growing serious. The deep space monitoring stations have detected signals from beyond the local group, patterns consistent with Devourer optimization protocols. How far beyond? Conservative estimate. They've been operating for at least 50 million years. Elena, this isn't just about our galaxy or even our local cluster. The Devourers might be a universe-wide phenomenon. The scope of the threat was almost incomprehensible across the cosmos. Biological diversity was being systematically eliminated by intelligences that viewed chaos as error and imperfection as disease. Earth's humble, chaotic humanity might be one of the last repositories of truly random evolution in existence. Then we know what we have to do, Vasquez said quietly. We have to spread the chaos. We have to teach the universe how to be unfit. It was a mission that would have seemed impossible to the humans, who were exiled from galactic civilization 20 years earlier. Those desperate refugees, fleeing to worthless worlds in converted cargo ships, could never have imagined that their descendants would become the universe's teachers of evolutionary wisdom. But perhaps that was the most human thing of all. Succeeding by failing, winning by losing, becoming fit by staying unfit. The Andromedans were worse than skeptical. They were horrified. You want us to deliberately contaminate our genetic lines? Ambassador Thelvani of the Andromedian High Council transmitted. During the first diplomatic contact, her species, the Yilthari, had achieved such perfect optimization that they were essentially living art. Every cell, every organ, every biological process refined to absolute efficiency. Dr. Vasquez, now in her 70s, but showing the robust health of someone who had spent decades on high-gravity frontier worlds, addressed the Andromedian Council from the bridge of the UGDF flagship Chaos Theory. The ship's name alone seemed to offend the perfectionist sensibilities of their hosts. Ambassador, your optimization is precisely why the Devourers target you first, Vasquez explained patiently. They see perfect systems as easy to improve further, but chaotic systems resist optimization because they're constantly changing. Chaos is the antithesis of progress, Thelvani replied, her perfect form radiating disgust. Our civilizations have spent millions of years eliminating randomness, chance, and genetic instability. You're asking us to undo everything we've achieved. I'm asking you to survive, Vasquez said simply. Your achievements are magnificent, but they're also predictable. The Devourers can model perfect systems, understand them, optimize them, but they can't optimize chaos because chaos doesn't hold still long enough. The holographic displays show the current state of the Andromeda Galaxy. 40% of its civilizations had already been consumed, and the pattern was unmistakable. The most advanced, most optimized species were being eliminated first. Observe your enemy's behavior. Admiral Mitchell interjected, highlighting Devour movements on the tactical display. They ignore primitive worlds and target your core civilizations. They're not interested in destroying life, they're interested in optimizing it. Your perfection makes you valuable to them, and your imperfection makes you worthless to them. Telvanni concluded with barely concealed contempt. Exactly, Vasquez agreed cheerfully. Our imperfection makes us invisible to entities that see perfection as the highest good. We're so chaotic, so inefficient, so randomly variable that they can't even process us as legitimate life forms. The concept was alien to beings who had spent eons perfecting themselves. But the evidence was undeniable. The human-led coalition had not only survived Devour contact, but had actively repelled them. By being deliberately inefficient, show them the hybrid colonies. Mitchell suggested. Vasquez activated a new display, showing the current state of the Milky Way's frontier. Worlds, what had once been barely habitable planets, were now thriving with diverse communities. That mixed human chaos with alien optimization. These are Kepler 442b's current inhabitants, she explained, showing images of beings that were clearly mixtures of human and various alien genetics. Human Velteron hybrids who can survive the methane atmosphere while retaining cognitive abilities. Human thorium combinations that thrive in high gravity. Human Zephyrian energy beings who exist in both matter and information states. They're abominations, Telvanni whispered, but her voice carried fascination alongside horror. They're survivors, Vasquez corrected, and more than that, they're evolutionarily superior to their parent species. Hybrid vigor combined with human adaptability creates beings that are both stable and chaotic, optimized and random. You're describing impossibilities. Optimization and chaos are mutually exclusive, are they? Or are they complementary? Optimization provides stability, chaos provides adaptability. Together, they create systems that can handle both expected and unexpected challenges. The debate continued for hours, with the Andromedians struggling to accept concepts that violated their fundamental understanding of evolution and progress. But as reports continued to stream in about Devour advances, desperate pragmatism began to override philosophical objections. If we were to attempt this, contamination, Telvanni finally said, the word clearly painful to her. How will we proceed? Slowly, Vasquez replied. We start with volunteers, individuals willing to accept human genetic material. The process is reversible in the first generation, so if it doesn't work, the effects can be undone. And if it does work, then you'll have created something new, not human, not Yilthari, but something that combines the best of both while avoiding the weaknesses of either. The first volunteers were desperate individuals from worlds already under Devour assault. They had nothing to lose and everything to gain from trying the human approach to survival. The genetic mixing process, developed over 20 years of frontier experimentation, was surprisingly gentle. Human DNA was added to existing genetic lines without replacing them, creating beneficial variations rather than wholesale changes. The results were immediate and remarkable. Yilthari human hybrids retained their species' cognitive abilities, while gaining human adaptability. When Devour forces encountered these new beings, their optimization algorithms simply couldn't process them. The hybrids were too chaotic to optimize efficiently, but too stable to dismiss as random noise. They're confused, reported Captain Sarachan, now commanding the hybrid defense forces in the Triangulum sector. Devour units are spending more time analyzing our defenders than attacking them. Their processing cycles are getting caught in loops trying to figure out how to optimize us. Word spread throughout the Andromedan galaxy as success stories accumulated. Not every genetic combination worked. Some hybrids were too chaotic to survive, others to optimize to resist Devour processing. But enough succeeded to prove the concept. Controlled chaos was superior to perfect optimization. When facing an enemy that viewed perfection as vulnerability, we're seeing something unprecedented. Dr. Kiksara reported from the mobile research stations that now followed hybrid populations throughout both galaxies. These mixed communities aren't just surviving, they're thriving. They're developing new technologies, new art forms, new ways of thinking that neither parent species could have achieved alone. The cultural implications were as significant as the genetic ones. Hybrid communities developed music that combined mathematical perfection with emotional chaos. They created art that was simultaneously ordered and random. They built technologies that worked through beneficial inefficiency rather than optimal design. We're witnessing the birth of a new form of consciousness, Vasquez observed during a research review, neither purely logical nor purely emotional, but something that combines both in dynamic balance. The transformation accelerated as more species accepted the human approach to survival. The rigid caste systems of optimized civilizations gave way to fluid communities, where role assignment was based on current need rather than genetic predetermination. Perfect languages evolved regional variations and slang, standardized architectures, incorporated personal touches and cultural adaptations. You've done more than save us from the devourers, Thelvani admitted during a cultural exchange ceremony. You've saved us from ourselves. We were becoming so perfect that we were losing the ability to change, to grow, to become something new. Change is the only constant, Vasquez replied, quoting human philosophy that had become galactic wisdom. The moment you stop changing, you start dying. The Devourer threat didn't disappear overnight. The machine intelligences continued their systematic optimization of biological systems throughout the universe, but they increasingly encountered resistance from communities that had learned the human art of beneficial chaos. Their optimization protocols, designed to process predictable biological systems, struggled with targets that refused to remain stable long enough to be optimized. They're adapting to, Admiral Mitchell warned during a strategic planning session. Latest intelligence suggests they're developing new algorithms, specifically designed to handle chaotic systems. Then we'll have to become more chaotic, Vasquez replied with the same determination that had carried humanity through exile and war. It's an arms race between optimization and chaos. The question is whether we can stay random faster than they can learn to optimize randomness. The answer came from an unexpected source. The hybrid populations, with their mixed heritage of optimization and chaos, began developing something entirely new: guided randomness. They could be chaotic when chaos was needed, stable when stability was required, and switch between states faster than any analysis could predict. We're not just random, explains Aaron Mitchell Thelvani, one of the first human Ylthari hybrids and Admiral Mitchell's adopted daughter. We're intelligently random. We use chaos as a tool rather than just accepting it as a condition. It was perhaps the ultimate expression of human evolutionary philosophy, turning randomness into strategy, making chaos serve purpose, achieving goals through beneficial imperfection. The galaxy's exiled Unfit had not only survived, but had evolved beyond the limitations that had caused their exile in the first place. The tribunal was right about one thing, Dr. Vasquez reflected during a quiet moment aboard the Chaos Theory. Humans do contaminate genetic lines. We contaminate them with survival. 50 years after the exile, the memorial ceremony on New Earth, humanity's first successful terraformed world, drew representatives from across the local group of galaxies. The planet itself was a testament to human philosophy, not a perfect recreation of Earth, but a chaotic mixture of Earth-like and alien biospheres that created something entirely new. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now approaching her 100th birthday, but still sharp-minded thanks to hybrid vigor genetic treatments, stood before the memorial wall that listed the names of everyone who had died during humanity's exile and the subsequent wars. The list was long, but it was not a record of failure. It was a record of sacrifice that had saved the universe from sterile perfection. We gathered today, she addressed the assembled crowd, not to mourn the past, but to celebrate the future that our sacrifices made possible. The crowd was itself a living demonstration of how much had changed. Humans stood beside Ylthari human hybrids, Veltaran human combinations, and dozens of other mixed populations that had never existed before the exile. Children played together who represented the genetic heritage of species from multiple galaxies, their laughter creating a chaotic symphony that no composer could have planned, but which was more beautiful than any optimized harmony. 50 years ago, we were judged unfit for galactic civilization, Vasquez continued. We were exiled because our genetic chaos was seen as contamination, our behavioral unpredictability as primitive, our emotional responses as weaknesses. She paused, looking out at the diverse crowd. The tribunal was not entirely wrong. We are contamination. We contaminate perfection with possibility. We are primitive. We remember that survival is more important than sophistication. We are emotional. We make decisions with our hearts as well as our heads. But what the tribunal failed to understand is that these flaws are not weaknesses to be corrected. They are strengths to be celebrated. Chaos enables adaptation. Primitiveness enables flexibility. Emotion enables sacrifice. Admiral Mitchell, now in his 80s and showing the proud bearing of someone who had led humanity from exile to salvation, stepped forward to speak. The young people in this crowd have grown up in a universe where diversity is strength, where imperfection is valued, where chaos and order dance together in beneficial balance. To them, the old universe of rigid optimization seems as alien as the devourers themselves. He gestured toward the memorial wall. These names represent the price of that transformation. People who died on hostile worlds because they refused to give up on the idea that humanity had something valuable to offer. People who died in battle against the devourers because they believed that chaos was worth defending. People who died in the hybrid programs because they were willing to risk everything to create Summit. Hing knew they died as exiles. Mitchell continued, his voice growing stronger. But they died as exiles who were right. The ceremony concluded with the lighting of the chaos flame, a symbolic fire that burned in patterns too complex for any algorithm to predict, fed by fuels that created colors that had never existed in nature. It was quintessentially human, beautiful, inefficient, impossible to optimize, and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. As the crowd dispersed, 3 figures remained by the memorial wall: Dr. Vasquez, Admiral Mitchell, and Chief Arbiter Zixathara, who had requested permission to attend the ceremony despite her role in humanity's exile. "I owe you an apology," Zixathara said quietly, her translucent form now showing the beneficial chaos of hybrid genetics. She had undergone the mixing process herself, becoming something between energy being and biological entity. More than an apology, I owe you the acknowledgement that everything I believed about fitness and evolution was wrong. You weren't wrong, Vasquez replied gently. You were incomplete. Optimization has its place, but so does chaos. The universe is big enough for both, the children who grow up in this new galaxy. Mitchell observed, watching hybrid youngsters play games that required both logical thinking and creative chaos. They'll never understand what it was like to live in a universe where perfection was considered the highest good. Perhaps that's for the best. Zixathara said, perhaps every generation should discover for themselves that imperfection is not a flaw to be corrected, but a feature to be celebrated. Dr. Vasquez nodded, thinking about the reports from deep space where human-led exploration teams were making contact with new galaxies, spreading the philosophy of beneficial chaos to civilizations that had never encountered the devourers, but might someday need the protection that only randomness could provide. We become something that never existed before, she observed, not just human, not just alien, but something that combines the best of biological chaos with the benefits of directed evolution. We've learned to be intentionally unfit. Intentionally unfit, Mitchell repeated, savoring the paradox. I like that. It captures exactly what we become, beings who choose imperfection. Because perfection is a dead end. As the 3 of them stood in comfortable silence, watching the chaos flame dance in patterns that could never be replicated, the universe around them continued its grand experiment in beneficial randomness. Across dozens of galaxies, hybrid communities were developing new forms of art, science, philosophy, and life itself. The devourers still existed, still pursued their mission of universal optimization, but they increasingly found their targets protected by a force they could never understand. The deliberate embrace of beautiful imperfection. You know what the most human thing of all is? Vasquez said finally. What? Asked Mitchell. We were exiled for being unfit. We were condemned for our flaws. We were judged as failures of evolution, and our response was to become more unfit, more flawed, more chaotic than ever before. She smiled. As saved the universe, the chaos flame flickered higher, its unpredictable patterns casting dancing shadows on the memorial wall, where the names of the exiled were honored not as victims, but as the founders of a new kind of civilization, one that had learned the most important lesson in evolutionary history, that the secret to fitness was staying unfit. In the end, humanity's greatest contribution to the universe was not their technology, their art, or their philosophy. It was their stubborn refusal to be perfected, their determined embrace of chaos, their willingness to remain beautifully, beneficially, gloriously unfit for any universe that demanded perfection. They had been exiled as genetic contamination. They had become the galaxy's salvation through contamination, and in a universe increasingly threatened by the sterile perfection of optimization, That contamination was exactly what everyone needed. The universe was a little more chaotic, a little more random, a little more beautifully imperfect because of humanity. And that, Dr. Elena Vasquez reflected as she watched the chaos flame dance, was perhaps the greatest legacy any species could hope to leave behind. As the memorial ceremony ended and the guests departed, one final message arrived through the quantum communication network that now connected the civilized galaxies. It came from the edge of observable space, from exploration teams that had pushed beyond the local group to make contact with the most distant clusters of stars. This is Captain Lisa Chenvextari commanding the deep space exploration vessel. Beautiful chaos, the transmission began. The speaker was a fourth-generation hybrid whose genetic heritage included human, Thorian, Veltaron, and Yilthari DNA, a being who could never have existed in the universe of genetic purity that had exiled humanity. We've made contact with the Sculptor Galaxy Cluster, she continued. Initial reports indicate massive Devourer presence, but also something unprecedented. We've discovered a civilization that achieved beneficial chaos independently. They call themselves the Weavers, and they've been fighting optimization protocols for over 100 million years. Dr. Vasquez smiled as she listened to the report. The universe was vast beyond imagination, and somewhere in its depths, other species had discovered the same truth that humanity had learned through exile, that imperfection was not a flaw to be corrected, but a strength to be celebrated. The Weavers want to establish contact with our coalition, Captain Chenvextari reported. They've heard about our success in the local group and want to learn our techniques for spreading beneficial chaos. Admiral Mitchell, they're requesting permission to send diplomatic representatives to the next Diversity Council meeting. As the transmission ended, Mitchell turned to Vasquez with an expression of wonder. Elena, do you realize what this means? We're not alone. Somewhere else in the universe, another species discovered that chaos is superior to perfection. More than that, Vasquez replied, it means that what we've learned, what we've become, isn't just a local phenomenon. The principle of beneficial chaos might be a universal constant. The most successful civilizations might be the ones that learn to stay beautifully unfit. The implications were staggering. Across the cosmos, species might be discovering that the secret to evolutionary success wasn't optimization, but the deliberate embrace of randomness. The universe might be full of civilizations that had learned to win by refusing to be perfect. The Devourers might be fighting a losing battle, Mitchell observed. Every time they optimize a galaxy, they might be creating the conditions for beneficial chaos to emerge somewhere else. Or maybe, Vasquez said thoughtfully, chaos and optimization are part of a larger cycle. Maybe the universe needs both. Periods of optimization followed by periods of beneficial randomness. Maybe we're not fighting the Devourers so much as balancing them. As they walked away from the memorial, leaving the chaos flame to burn its beautiful, unpredictable patterns through the night, both of them carried the same thought. Humanity's exile had been the beginning of something much larger than anyone could have imagined. They had not just saved their own galaxy, they had helped prove a principle that might reshape the entire universe. The Unfit had indeed become the galaxy's last hope. But more than that, they had become the universe's first teachers of a truth that transcended species, transcended galaxies, transcended the very concept of biological perfection, that the most advanced civilizations were the ones that learned to celebrate their flaws, embrace their chaos, and find strength in the very imperfections that others might see as weaknesses. In a universe full of threats that targeted perfection as vulnerability, being beautifully, deliberately, gloriously unfit wasn't just survival strategy, it was the highest form of evolution.